Hello mappers! In this video we'll be learning how to add another dimension to your maps using 3D visualization techniques in ArcGIS Pro. We'll be first talking about how to simplify your symbology, convert your map to a 3D scene, navigate that scene, and then play around with properties like offsets and exaggeration, and even play around with linking your 3D view to the 2D view. We'll be starting off in ArcGIS Pro, here we are, and currently we're looking at some data for the Grand Tetons area in northwest Wyoming. What we're looking at is actually a raster layer of suitability for places to camp, where the red to yellow to green to blue indicate suitability for camping based on factors like proximity to trail, the view of the mountain peaks there, and also the steepness or slope. When you have a layer like this that you want to put into 3D, it often helps to simplify the symbology quite a bit. So what we would want to do is get rid of all four colors, especially since that yellow is not, the yellow and red is not usable anyway. So what we're going to do is play around with the symbology and make a basic map with only the layers that we need with a simple symbology. In this case, we're just going to pick the colors for the most suitable areas and not even symbolize the less suitable areas. So now we have a map that looks like that. And then we're ready to start. Once you have a map with very simple symbology, just the bare minimum that you absolutely need, then what you do is go to your View tab, and you can go to Convert, and whatever map you're looking at, you can say Convert to a scene. A map is 2D, a scene is 3D. And a global scene is if you want to show a very large area like a continent or the whole globe. We just have a very small area, so we want to make a local scene. So you can convert from here. It'll take a moment to do. And it doesn't look like much yet, but when you use your mouse, and you have to play around with navigation. The steps for this are in the lab, and you can get a lot of information online, but you can use your left mouse button to just move around, and that's just really basic. You can do your right mouse key and move it kind of back and forth to zoom in and out. You can use the scroll wheel also to zoom in and out. Or you can push the scroll wheel like a button, and then you can drag it up. See how I'm moving my mouse up a little bit? And then you can actually get to looking at things in 3D. So using that and the scroll wheel to zoom, and then the left mouse to pan around, you can get a pretty cool view. But what gives you that angle and that ability to spin around, that's pushing down the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel like a button. And then you can see it looks really choppy. Once I let go and it takes a minute to redraw, it will look a lot better. I will add that viewing in 3D is pretty process intensive. So if you are using a remote desktop, it's going to be really slow. If you're using a remote desktop with slow internet, it's going to be painful. If you're working locally and your laptop just isn't that beefy, it might also be really slow. So give it a little time, and if it's just not working out, then maybe don't do this part. There is a way to look at 3D stuff using ArcGIS Online, and I'll give you a quick demo for that in a separate video. Now it's redrawn mostly. So we can see we have pretty good quality. We can see the terrain is already draped. So we have this base map and we have our layers, and they're already draped over the terrain. And as this happened as soon as we converted to the 3D format. And what it's doing is, notice that we have all these different categories of layers on the left. We have 3D layers. So those would be any layer that has built-in Z values. So not just a point layer with an XY, but a point layer with an XY and a Z value for each point. So those are layers that are 3D inherently, and those go in the 3D layer category. We don't have any like that. The 2D layers are just regular layers, any layer that you've ever used in class. And what it'll do is just kind of put it in the map, but the 2D layers require that it be draped over some elevation surface. And so that's the bottom category, is this elevation surface, the ground, and this is coming from a world elevation 3D layer. So this is actually coming from ArcGIS Online, from their cloud services. So this is not something that we added. It's not a layer that we added. It's not a function that we turned on. It just did this automatically when we created our 3D map. If you had your own elevation layer, you could have this ground surface be your own layer and not the one coming from online. We're going to just keep it like this because it's easier that way. So that's where the elevation is coming from. It's not built into our layers, it's built into this terrain layer. The software knows how high each cell should be, basically, and then it can just drape our data on top of that 3D model. So one thing you'll notice about looking at 3D stuff is the colors and the symbology. You might need to play around with it a little bit. You might want to play with contrasting colors. You might want to play with an offset. So when you have multiple layers together in 3D, sometimes they kind of fight each other for who's going to be on top. So there's a way that you can go to a given layer, right click, go to properties for that layer. And for elevation, you can say features are on the ground, or features are at an absolute height, maybe like an airplane. You can also provide a cartographic offset. So if you notice that sometimes your trail line seems to go underneath the ground, underneath the elevation surface, you can give it a little offset and just kind of bump it up a little bit higher. And it's going to be in meters. So if I bumped it up by 10 meters and then hit OK, the trail line will redraw, and now it's kind of floating above the surface. It's a little bit hard to tell right now, but if I were to go down a little bit and zoom in a little bit, we could probably see it. Let's zoom back out and play around with the base map. So right now we have just the topographic base map, but for 3D it might be nice to have an image. So let's pick the imagery base map and see how that looks. All right, it has finished drawing. It does take a little while. Once it's done drawing, then you can just orient the map how you think it should be best shown to show the areas. I think highlighting this area up here where the campsites are the best, there's the most blue up there, I think that's probably what you want to go with. I also want to point out there are a couple other things that you can do. So if we go to View, you can actually link the original map to the 3D scene. So you can do link views. So now these maps are linked together, and we can right click on it and make them go side by side. So now as I zoom over here, it will zoom the other map along with it, which is pretty neat. You also might be noticing that the mountains, if you don't like the way the mountains are, if you think they're too exaggerated or not exaggerated enough, you can play around with that as well. So under elevation surfaces on the left, you can go to ground. You can go up here to appearance. You can change your vertical exaggeration. So right now it's set to 1. If I made it 0.5, we would see the mountains will come down so they don't look so big. Let's close this again so we can see the full picture. So now you can see it looks a lot flatter. It's still finishing drawing, but it looks a lot flatter. And you can make it look however you want. Sometimes when you do things, it doesn't look high enough. Sometimes it looks too high, so you can play with vertical exaggeration. You can also play with adding some shadowing and allowing to navigate underground. And the last thing to show you is when you have this scene in your ArcGIS Pro project, only you can see it. But if you would like to publish it and actually make it be available through ArcGIS Online, you can go to Share, you can go to Web Scene, and you can actually share your map as a web scene that you can then get a link for, URL for, and anyone can view it through just a regular web page. So those are the basics for how to take a 2D map and turn it into a 3D scene. And I think it's pretty neat what you can do. And I think it's a great way to visualize your final product. Now you're ready to go have some fun with your own 3D maps. Thanks for watching.